Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Kentucky. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time at which you're listening to this narration. We're interested to know which places and what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. In the rolling hills of Bourbon County, Kentucky, there stands a property that locals have avoided for nearly a century. The Morgan estate, once a symbol of Southern prosperity, now lies in ruins, its only remaining structure a stone well, unnaturally deep and seemingly untouched by time. According to county records dated 1868, it was on a particularly bitter winter evening when identical twin brothers Elias and Ezra Morgan, aged 32, were last seen by anyone in the community. What followed was a series of events so disturbing that many historical accounts were deliberately obscured, with documents sealed away in courthouse basements until their discovery during renovations in 1962. The Morgan family arrived in Kentucky in 1841, purchasing nearly 300 acres of prime farmland just outside Paris. Hard-working and ambitious, August Morgan quickly established himself as one of the region's most successful tobacco farmers. His wife, Lenora, was known for her reserved nature and rarely ventured into town. When they were blessed with identical twin sons in 1836, the family seemed destined for generations of prosperity. Local church records show regular attendance and donations, though, curiously, the Morgan twins were never baptized, an unusual omission for a family of their standing. What makes this case particularly unsettling is how ordinary everything appeared on the surface. Neighbors described the Morgan brothers as unfailingly polite but oddly detached. Neither married, which wasn't uncommon for men who stood to inherit substantial property. They managed the farm's operations after their father's passing in 1861, maintaining its productivity despite the economic devastation of the Civil War. According to tax records, the Morgan tobacco yield actually increased during those years when most farms struggled, a fact that raised eyebrows among neighboring farmers, but was attributed to the twins' methodical approach to agriculture. On December 17, 1868, a severe winter storm descended upon Bourbon County. The Morgan twins had traveled into Paris to purchase supplies, as confirmed by receipts from Ferguson's general store. They were observed leaving town around 4 p.m., with several witnesses noting they seemed in unusually high spirits. This was the last time anyone would report seeing the brothers alive. When they failed to appear at the livestock auction 3 days later, business associate Thomas Wilford rode out to the Morgan property to investigate. What Wilford discovered would become the foundation of one of Kentucky's most disturbing historical mysteries. The main house stood empty but undisturbed, a fire still smoldering in the hearth, half-empty cups of tea on the kitchen table, ledgers open on the desk. The horses had been properly stabled and fed, yet there was no sign of the Morgan twins. Most peculiar was the discovery that the old well, located approximately 50 yards from the main house, had been uncovered despite the freezing temperatures, its wooden lid removed and nowhere to be found. In his sworn statement to the county sheriff, recorded in the Bourbon County Register dated December 21, 1868, Wilford stated, "It appeared as though someone had been working at the well. Fresh soil was scattered about, and a rope extended down into the darkness. I called down, but received no answer. There was an odd smell, not like anything I've encountered before. Not decay, not precisely, but something equally unsettling. The air around the well mouth seemed to hang differently, as if reluctant to mix with the surrounding atmosphere." When authorities investigated, they made several puzzling discoveries. First, the well, which had been dug decades earlier, during the original property development, was found to be significantly deeper than typical wells in the region. Second, unusual markings were discovered carved into the interior stones, markings that local historian Professor Samuel Hargrove would later describe in his 1954 monograph as reminiscent of Surveyor's notations, but with peculiar variations that suggested a private mathematical system. Third, and perhaps most disturbing, the sheriff's men reported that sounds seemed to emanate from deep within the well, sounds they described as neither human nor animal, but something akin to distant machinery. Initial assumptions centered on the possibility that the Morgan twins had fallen into the well while attempting repairs. Yet no bodies were recovered despite multiple attempts to explore its depths. According to the sheriff's report, the well appears to descend far beyond what would be necessary to reach water. Our longest rope, measuring 60 feet, did not touch bottom. This unusual depth prompted questions about the well's original purpose, as most wells in the region extended no more than 30 feet below ground. The absence of bodies led to speculation about foul play, with suspicion falling upon itinerant workers who had been employed during the harvest season. However, interviews with neighboring farms confirmed that all seasonal laborers had departed the area weeks earlier. Another theory suggested that the twins had absconded with the farm's considerable profits. Yet financial records showed all accounts in order, with significant sums still deposited in the Paris National Bank. As weeks passed without resolution, attention turned to the Morgan family history. Old land deeds revealed that before the Morgans purchased the property, it had belonged to the Carrington family, who had abandoned it suddenly in 1839 after 20 years of ownership. No explanation was given for their departure, though church records noted that Reverend Mills had been called to the property for what was described only as a matter of grave spiritual concern. The church ledger, discovered during a parish inventory in 1957, contained a cryptic notation in the Reverend's handwriting: "The Carrington well reaches too deep. What they have awakened cannot be returned to slumber." The investigation might have ended there, another mysterious disappearance in rural America during a time when record-keeping was inconsistent. However, in March of 1869, something occurred that reignited interest in the case. A surveyor named Marcus Finch, hired to assess the property for potential sale, made a discovery that was documented in a letter to his wife, later preserved in the Kentucky Historical Society archives. "My measurements of the Morgan property have yielded perplexing results," Finch wrote. "When plotting the dimensions of the land against county records, I discovered a discrepancy. The well sits at what appears to be the exact center of a perfect circle approximately 100 yards in diameter. Within this circle, my compass behaves erratically, and my calculations repeatedly produce errors. Most disturbing is the fact that sound behaves strangely here. Voices seem to carry differently, as if echoing from somewhere else entirely. On Tuesday last, I distinctly heard my own words repeated back to me with a delay of several seconds, though I stood entirely alone on the property." Finch's observations might have been dismissed as superstition had he not been known as a methodical and rational man. His survey notes, which include precise measurements and calculations, show increasing agitation as he worked near the well. His final entry reads simply, "There is something beneath the Morgan property that defies conventional understanding. The well is merely its entrance." Further investigation of Finch's papers, conducted in 1965 by graduate student Harriet Summers, revealed additional details not included in his official report. In his personal journal, Finch described an incident that occurred during his final day on the property. "While taking measurements near the well, I observed what appeared to be a reflection in the water below, not of the sky above, but of two men watching me. When I shifted position to look directly into the well, the surface showed only darkness. Yet each time I resumed my work and glanced indirectly, the reflection returned, two identical faces, observing with an expression I can only describe as patient anticipation." Following Finch's assessment, the property remained unsold. Local farmers avoided it, claiming crops planted near the boundaries failed to thrive. In 1872, a proposal was made to fill in the well, but workers refused to approach it after several reported experiencing profound vertigo and disorientation when attempting to do so. The foreman, William Stokes, described in his work log how one laborer, upon approaching within 10 feet of the well, began to speak in a voice not his own, uttering phrases in what seemed to be Latin or Greek before collapsing. When revived, the man had no recollection of the incident, but refused to return to the site. Eventually, the county board voted to erect a fence around the property, with strict prohibitions against trespassing. Records from the 1875 Bourbon County Administrative Sessions indicate that the decision was influenced by a sealed testimony from Dr. Edmund Clark, who had examined several individuals who had ventured onto the property. Clark's report, unsealed in 1967 as part of a medical history study, contains disturbing observations. In each case, prolonged proximity to the Morgan well appears to induce a specific form of delusion, namely, the conviction that one is being observed by duplicates of oneself. More alarming is the consistency of these reports across individuals with no prior knowledge of each other's experiences. For decades, the Morgan mystery faded from public consciousness, becoming little more than a regional curiosity. The property fell into further disrepair, the main house gradually collapsing, fields overgrowing with native vegetation. Then, in 1923, Bourbon County experienced a series of minor earthquakes. Following these tremors, farmer Wilson Drake, whose property adjoined the abandoned Morgan land, reported hearing voices in duplicate emanating from the direction of the well. Drake's statement, recorded by Dr. James Harriet and preserved in his medical logs, described the voices as speaking in unison, yet with a delay, as if one was echoing the other from a great distance. When questioned further, Drake admitted to having heard similar phenomena over the years, but had feared being labeled unstable if he reported it. More significantly, he produced a pocket watch he claimed to have found near the property boundary in 1919, a gold timepiece bearing the initials EM, which matched descriptions of watches known to have been owned by the Morgan twins. The watch's curious feature was its hands, which moved counterclockwise, despite the mechanism appearing otherwise conventional. Horologist Peter Simmons, who examined the timepiece in 1924, noted in his assessment, the internal components appear standard in design, yet function in reverse. More curious is the fact that despite this reversal, the watch keeps perfect time, suggesting intentional modification by someone with exceptional skill. Drake's discovery prompted renewed interest in the Morgan case. The Bourbon County Historical Society commissioned a formal investigation, though limited in scope due to persistent local superstitions surrounding the property. This investigation, led by local historian Margaret Holloway, focused primarily on compiling historical documents rather than physical exploration of the site. Holloway's research, published in a limited monograph titled The Vanishing Bourbon County's Unsolved Mysteries, established a more comprehensive timeline of events surrounding the twins' disappearance. According to Holloway's findings, the Morgan brothers had exhibited increasingly unusual behavior in the months preceding their disappearance. Store ledgers indicated purchases of scientific instruments, including an unusually expensive telescope ordered from Philadelphia. The brothers had also withdrawn from community events, declining invitations they had previously accepted. Most notably, Holloway discovered a letter from local physician Dr. James Whitcomb, dated November 1868, expressing concern about the twins' mental state. I was called to the Morgan property last Tuesday to address what was described as episodes of disorientation, Whitcomb wrote to a colleague in Louisville. Upon examination, I found both brothers in good physical health, but exhibiting identical symptoms of an unusual nature. Both described experiencing moments when they could see through each other's eyes, perceiving the world from two perspectives simultaneously. Both reported the same dream, standing at the bottom of their well, looking up to see themselves looking down. What concerns me most is not the shared delusion, which might be explained by their close fraternal bond, but the mathematical precision with which they described these experiences. They spoke of angles, distances, and calculations that suggest not derangement, but a disturbing lucidity. In 1935, Professor of Geology Martin Whittaker from Transylvania University conducted the first scientific investigation of the well. Using equipment that was advanced for the time, Whittaker determined that the well connected to a natural limestone cave system. His measurements indicated that the well shaft descended approximately 90 feet before opening into a larger subterranean space. Most intriguing was his recording of what he termed acoustic anomalies, sounds that appeared to violate normal properties of echo and reverberation. When a sound is created at the well's opening, Whittaker wrote in his subsequent paper, it produces not an echo, but what might be described as a precursor, a faint duplication of the sound that appears to precede the original noise by a fraction of a second. This phenomenon defies current understanding of acoustic principles and suggests unique geological formations beneath the Morgan property. Whittaker's assistant, graduate student Edwin Forsyth, maintained a separate field journal during the expedition. This journal, donated to the University Archives after Forsyth's death in 1981, contains observations not included in the official report. Most notably, Forsyth described an incident where a surveying rod, lowered into the well, emerged with what appeared to be tool marks, not made by their equipment, fresh scratches in a deliberate pattern. More disturbing was his claim that photographic plates exposed near the well developed with curious anomalies. The images show not what was before the camera, but what appears to be the same scene viewed from a slightly different angle, as if the camera had been positioned several feet from its actual location. Whittaker's research was interrupted by funding issues related to the Great Depression, and his planned expedition into the cave system never materialized. His notes indicate increasing fascination with the well's properties, bordering on obsession. His final journal entry before abandoning the project reads, "I am now convinced that what lies beneath the Morgan property is not merely a geological curiosity, but something far more significant." The mathematical properties of the well's construction suggest knowledge beyond what was available in this region during the early 19th century. Following Whittaker's investigation, the property remained largely undisturbed for nearly 2 decades. Local residents continued to report occasional anomalies, strange lights, unexplained sounds, livestock that refused to approach the property boundaries. During this period, the story of the Morgan twins entered regional folklore, often embellished with supernatural elements absent from the historical record. Yet the core mystery remained intact and unresolved. The Morgan property remained abandoned through the Second World War, gradually reclaimed by nature as the house collapsed and fields grew wild. In 1952, the last living relative of the Morgan family, a grandniece named Eleanor Morgan Prescott, authorized a final investigation before signing over the land to Bourbon County. This investigation, led by private detective Franklin Hayes, produced the most substantial documentation of the site's peculiarities. Hayes approached the case with skepticism, believing the disappearance had a rational explanation, likely murder or flight, to avoid debts or legal troubles. His methodical investigation began with a complete review of all historical documents, followed by interviews with elderly residents whose parents or grandparents had known the Morgan twins. What emerged was a more complex picture of the brothers than earlier accounts had suggested. According to Hayes's notes, discovered during the cataloging of his papers following his death in 1961, several residents recalled stories about the twins' unusual behaviors. They were said to frequently speak in unison, finish each other's sentences, and claim to experience identical dreams. More tellingly, they had developed what locals termed a peculiar interest in mathematics and astronomy, subjects uncommon among farmers of that era. Hayes discovered that in the months before their disappearance, the Morgan twins had placed orders for several scientific texts from booksellers in Louisville and Cincinnati. Receipt records show purchases of works on non-Euclidean geometry, theoretical physics, then in its infancy, and ancient astronomical calculations. They had also acquired specialized tools, including an unusually precise sextant and surveying equipment of higher quality than would be needed for standard agricultural purposes. Most significantly, Hayes uncovered correspondence between Ezra Morgan and Professor William Patterson of Harvard University regarding what was described only as theoretical calculations concerning dimensional thresholds. Patterson's response, dated October 1868, expressed both interest and concern. While your mathematical propositions are intriguing, I must caution against practical application of these theories. Some doorways, once opened, cannot be easily closed again. Further research into Patterson's papers, conducted in 1963 by science historian Dr. Alan Smithfield, revealed additional context for this exchange. Patterson, it seemed, had been corresponding with several unconventional thinkers across the country who were developing theories that anticipated aspects of relativity and quantum mechanics. In his private notes, Patterson described Ezra Morgan as possibly the most insightful of my rural correspondents, a natural mathematician with intuitive understanding of concepts I've seen formally expressed only in the most advanced European journals. Most intriguing was a diagram found among Patterson's papers, labeled simply Morgan Configuration. The drawing shows a cylindrical shaft intersecting with what appears to be a spherical space. Annotations in Patterson's handwriting refer to reflection points, threshold equations, and most curiously, bifurcation of observer and observed. Smithfield's analysis suggests that the Morgans were attempting to create what might now be described as a controlled dimensional anomaly, a point where conventional physical laws might be manipulated or suspended. Hayes's investigation culminated in his personal exploration of the well in April 1953. Equipped with modern climbing gear and lighting, he descended into the shaft. His recorded observations, captured on a portable dictation machine, begin professionally but grow increasingly disjointed. Approximately 45 minutes into the recording, Hayes describes reaching the bottom of the well shaft and discovering a narrow horizontal passage. The tunnel extends beyond the reach of my light, his voice notes. The air is unusually dry and carries a static charge that makes my hair stand on end. The walls bear the same markings observed by earlier investigators, but I can now see they form a continuous pattern, mathematical in nature, but with a logic I cannot immediately discern. At regular intervals, precisely 8 feet apart, are niches carved into the stone. Each contains what appears to be a small mirror, though the reflective surface is like no glass I've seen, darker, with a quality that seems to absorb light rather than reflect it. What follows in the recording is approximately 20 minutes of Hayes' progress through the tunnel, with frequent pauses to document measurements and observations. Then the audio captures a sudden change in acoustic properties. Hayes's voice begins to produce the precursor echo phenomenon described by Whittaker years earlier. More alarmingly, Hayes himself notices this effect, commenting, "My voice is coming back to me before I speak. This is not possible." The recording continues with Hayes's description of reaching a junction where the tunnel branches into 2 identical passages. Both appear identical in every detail, same dimensions, same markings on the walls. Even the pattern of moisture on the stone appears mirrored between them. I've marked the left passage with chalk and will proceed in that direction. Several minutes later, Hayes's voice returns, now noticeably agitated. I've reached another junction identical to the first, but my chalk mark is now on the right-hand tunnel. This contradicts my careful tracking of direction. Either I've become disoriented, or the spatial properties of this system do not conform to normal geometry. The final minutes of the recording contain Hayes's increasingly agitated observations as he describes reaching a circular chamber. His description, punctuated by long pauses and heavy breathing, indicates a room approximately 30 feet in diameter with a perfectly smooth floor and ceiling. Most disturbing is his description of what appears to be reflective surfaces around the perimeter. Not mirrors exactly, but something similar. in which he claims to see himself duplicated, but with subtle differences. In each reflection, I appear slightly altered, Hayes notes, his voice now barely above a whisper. In one, my clothing is different. In another, I seem older. In a third, the scar on my left hand is on my right instead. As I move, the reflections move in perfect synchronization, yet each performs actions I do not. When I raise my right hand, one reflection raises its left. When I step forward, another steps back. They are me, yet not me. Variations on a theme. The recording ends abruptly with Hayes's exclamation, "There's someone else here." Two figures in the far reflection. They're turning toward me now, their faces. They're identical. My God. The audio degenerates into static before cutting off entirely. Hayes emerged from the well approximately 3 hours later, according to the assistant who had remained at the surface. This individual, Thomas Meeks, provided a sworn statement indicating that Hayes appeared physically unchanged but psychologically altered. According to Meeks, Hayes emerged from the well, moving with unusual precision, as if measuring each step. His speech had a peculiar cadence, and he would occasionally pause mid-sentence, as if listening to words no one else could hear. Hayes refused to discuss what he had seen, immediately packed his equipment, and departed the site. Hayes's official report, submitted 1 week later, contained only technical measurements of the well shaft and a recommendation that the site be permanently sealed. The report concludes with a single sentence that has been the subject of much speculation. What waits below has waited long enough. Most tellingly, Hayes abandoned his detective agency within a month of the investigation, selling his practice and relocating to New Mexico. The few acquaintances who maintained contact reported that he had developed an intense fear of reflective surfaces and would not allow mirrors in his home. He refused all requests for interviews regarding the Morgan case until his death in 1961. Dr. Caroline Foster, who treated Hayes during his final illness, noted in her medical records that he suffered from what would now be recognized as severe post-traumatic stress disorder. The patient exhibits extreme anxiety when discussing his former profession, Foster wrote. He is convinced that he is being observed at all times by what he describes as versions of myself that are not myself. Most concerning is his insistence that they are coming closer and that the barrier is thinning. Following Hayes's investigation, Bourbon County officials made the decision to seal the well. In June 1953, workers poured concrete into the shaft. According to foreman's reports, an unusual amount of material was required, as if the well was consuming the concrete faster than it could solidify. Workers reported that the mixing equipment repeatedly malfunctioned near the site, and several described experiencing momentary disorientation as if briefly occupying someone else's perspective. Eventually, the shaft was filled and capped with a concrete slab bearing no marking or commemoration. Engineer Walter Simmons, who oversaw the sealing operation, maintained private notes that were discovered among his effects following his death in 1967. These notes describe a peculiar phenomenon observed during the final stages of the process. As the last of the concrete was poured, a vibration emanated from the well, not felt but heard, a deep harmonic resonance that caused several workers to cover their ears. Most disturbing was its effect on timing devices. Every watch and clock within 50 yards simultaneously stopped for precisely 3 minutes and 18 seconds. When they resumed operation, they ran backward for approximately 10 minutes before returning to normal function. The story might have ended there, filed away as an unsolved historical curiosity. However, during courthouse renovations in 1962, archivist Martha Simmons discovered a collection of documents that had been sealed in a wall cavity, apparently hidden rather than properly filed. These included original surveyor's maps of the Morgan property with unusual notations, journal fragments believed to belong to Elias Morgan, and most significantly, a sealed letter addressed to "those who come after," written in a precise, duplicated hand. The journal fragments provide insight into the brothers' thinking in the months before their disappearance. Entries from July 1868 describe their initial discovery. "We have confirmed today what we long suspected. The well on our property is not merely a source of water, but a point of unusual properties. E lowered the mirror as we calculated and observed the discrepancy in reflection angle. The result exceeds our expectations and confirms Patterson's theoretical framework. What exists below is not a continuation of the space above, but something altogether different." Later entries document a series of experiments, including lowering various objects into the well and recording the results. "The wooden cube returned altered," one entry notes. "Identical in all dimensions, yet a perfect mirror image of the original. When placed alongside its counterpart, both objects begin to resonate at a frequency just beyond hearing. Most curious is their behavior when separated. Moving one causes the other to shift in precise synchronization, despite no physical connection between them." A September entry describes a more disturbing experiment. "Today we lowered the caged sparrow as planned. The results were unexpected and troubling. The bird returned not as a mirror image, but duplicated exactly. Both specimens appear identical in every detail, yet their behavior suggests subtle differences. When placed in the same cage, they do not recognize each other as the same species. More alarming is their tendency to move in perfect unison despite being separated. E suggests we proceed with caution before attempting the final experiment." The letter, dated December 16, 1868, one day before the twins' disappearance, contains what appears to be a rational yet disturbing explanation for what the brothers intended. While the complete text has never been publicly released, Professor Jerome Wallace, who was permitted to examine the documents for his 1964 study of Kentucky historical anomalies, provided this summary. The Morgan document outlines a theoretical framework combining principles of geometry and physics in a manner that anticipates concepts not formally developed until the early 20th century. At its core is the proposition that certain physical locations serve as what the authors term thin points, places where conventional dimensional boundaries are naturally compromised. The brothers believed they had identified such a location on their property and had spent years calculating how to enhance and potentially traverse this boundary. Wallace notes that while much of the document reads as delusion or pseudoscience, certain mathematical formulations show surprising sophistication. Most disturbing is the clear indication that the Morgan twins fully intended to attempt some form of passage or transition via the well, which they had modified according to precise calculations. "We have confirmed through repeated experiments that duplication occurs across the boundary," the letter reportedly states. "Objects placed at the threshold return in duplicate, though never precisely identical. Living organisms present greater challenges, but our calculations suggest that a simultaneous crossing by identical subjects might create the necessary symmetry for successful transition." The final paragraph, which Wallace quotes directly, reads, "By the time this account is discovered, we will have either succeeded in our transition or failed in our attempt. If the former, there exist now 2 worlds with 1 fewer inhabitant each. If the latter, then this record may serve as warning that some boundaries persist for necessary reasons." Wallace's preliminary analysis of the Morgan documents generated significant interest among specialists in various fields. In 1965, physicist Dr. Richard Feynman was reportedly shown transcripts of the mathematical portions of the letter. While no formal statement was ever issued, colleagues reported that Feynman was unusually disturbed by the material and remarked that either these farmers were a century ahead of their time or they had help from somewhere we don't understand. In 1968, precisely 100 years after the disappearance, geologist Dr. Rebecca Chambers conducted ground-penetrating radar studies of the Morgan property as part of a broader geological survey of Bourbon County. Her findings, published in a regional scientific journal, Note an unusual cavity structure beneath the sealed well, a spherical void approximately 50 feet in diameter that appeared to have no natural explanation. More puzzling was the reading's suggestion that the space contained mirrored or highly reflective surfaces, despite being sealed from outside access for over a century. When combined with meteorological data, Chambers' study revealed another curiosity. The temperature above the well site remained precisely 1.8 degrees cooler than surrounding areas regardless of season. This temperature differential formed a perfect circle, matching the dimensions noted in Finch's original survey. Additionally, instruments placed within this circle exhibited what Chambers termed temporal drift, clocks running at slightly different rates than identical devices placed outside the boundary. The differential is minimal but measurable, Chambers wrote. Atomic clocks placed within the circle run approximately 3.6 microseconds slower per hour than those outside the boundary. This suggests a localized distortion of space-time consistent with the presence of unusual mass or energy concentrations beneath the surface. Chambers proposed further investigation, but funding was denied, and the property was designated a restricted research area by county officials. Dr. Martin Evers, who served on the committee that rejected Chambers' proposal, later admitted in private correspondence that the decision was influenced by unusual events during the initial survey. 3 of Dr. Chambers' assistants reported identical nightmares during their week on the property, dreams in which they observed themselves from multiple perspectives simultaneously. One individual suffered a severe psychological breakdown after insisting that his reflection had begun moving independently of his own actions. Subsequent attempts to study the site have been consistently denied by local authorities, citing various practical concerns, unstable ground, potential environmental contaminants, historical preservation requirements. Yet private conversations with county officials, documented by journalist Sarah Mitchell in her 1967 investigation, suggest a more straightforward motivation: fear. "Nobody who spends time near that place comes back quite right," Mitchell quotes former Sheriff William Donovan as saying, "It's like they leave pieces of themselves behind, or maybe bring back pieces that don't belong to them. The Morgans found something down there, something that should have stayed buried. Best thing we ever did was pouring concrete down that hole." Today, the Morgan property remains undeveloped, a wild patch amid productive farmland. Local residents still avoid the area, though few could articulate exactly why. Occasionally, visitors report unusual phenomena: watches that run backward, compasses that spin without settling, the sensation of being watched by someone standing just behind them. Most common is the report of hearing voices, always described as identical male voices, speaking in perfect unison, seemingly emanating from everywhere and nowhere at once. Perhaps most unsettling are the reports, documented as recently as 1967, of individuals claiming to have seen 2 men of identical appearance standing at the perimeter of the property. These figures, always described as tall, thin, and dressed in outdated clothing, are reported to observe visitors briefly before walking away into the underbrush. Those who have attempted to follow report that the figures simply vanish, leaving no tracks or disturbance in the vegetation. In 1966, photographer James Collins captured what remains the only purported image of these figures, a blurred photograph showing 2 men of identical height and build standing at the edge of the property. Analysis by photographic experts confirmed the image had not been tampered with, but could not definitively identify the individuals. Most striking is their positioning, standing precisely back to back yet seeming to face the camera simultaneously, an optical impossibility that has never been satisfactorily explained. Bourbon County resident Marion Hatcher, whose family farm borders the Morgan property, described an encounter in the summer of 1965. "I was checking our fence line when I saw them. 2 men, identical in every way, standing just inside the old Morgan boundary. They were watching me, both, with the exact same expression. When I called out, they smiled, the same smile at the exact same moment, but didn't respond. I turned to call my husband, and when I looked back, they were gone. That night, I dreamed I was two people at once, seeing myself from two different angles. I haven't gone near that property since. Local historian Robert Jenkins, who has documented dozens of similar accounts, notes a consistent pattern. The figures are always seen in pairs, always identical, and always maintain a specific distance from observers, close enough to be clearly visible, but too far for detailed identification. Most witnesses report a profound sense of unease, not from any threatening behavior, but from what they describe as a wrongness in how the figures move and relate to each other, as if they are a single entity somehow occupying two bodies simultaneously. The Morgan case remains officially classified as an unsolved disappearance. Rational explanations exist: murder, accident, deliberate abandonment, yet none fully account for the accumulated anomalies associated with the property. What we know with certainty is that on a winter evening in 1868, two identical brothers vanished near a well they had modified according to calculations that seemingly anticipated physics concepts not yet formalized. We know that multiple investigators over the century that followed encountered phenomena they could not explain, and we know that something about the Morgan property continues to resist conventional understanding. In his final public statement regarding the case, made during a 1966 Historical Society meeting, Professor Wallace offered this observation: "The truly disturbing aspect of the Morgan disappearance is not the possibility that they met with foul play or accident, but rather the possibility that they succeeded in their attempt. Their calculations, primitive yet sophisticated, suggest a perspective on physical reality that allows for transitions we would consider impossible. If they were correct, then perhaps they aren't missing at all. Perhaps they're exactly where they intended to be, observing us from across a boundary we cannot perceive." Psychologist Dr. Elizabeth Winters, who studied the psychological impacts of the Morgan legend on local residents, offered a different perspective in her 1967 paper. Whether or not something anomalous exists at the Morgan property, the collective belief has created a psychological reality that functions as if it were true. What fascinates me is not whether the twins discovered a dimensional portal, but why this particular narrative has such psychological resonance. There is something deeply unsettling about the concept of duplication, about encountering versions of ourselves that are simultaneously us and not us. Perhaps the enduring power of the Morgan mystery lies in how it confronts us with questions about the nature of identity itself. Recent developments have added new dimensions to the historical mystery. In 2004, during digitization of Harvard University archives, additional correspondence between Ezra Morgan and Professor Patterson was discovered. These letters, previously misfiled, contain more explicit references to the twins' theories. In one passage, Ezra writes, "We have determined that what conventional science regards as singular identity, one mind and one body, may be merely a limited perspective. Our experiments suggest that consciousness can be entangled across what appear to be separate entities, creating a singular awareness that experiences reality from multiple viewpoints simultaneously. The implications are profound and disturbing." Patterson's replies show increasing concern as the brothers' experiments progressed. His final letter, dated November 1868, contains a clear warning: "I implore you to reconsider your planned demonstration. While your mathematical framework is sound in theory, the practical application poses risks you cannot fully anticipate. If your calculations regarding entangled consciousness are correct, what you propose is not merely a physical journey, but a fundamental alteration of your very identity. Ask yourselves, if you succeed in creating a state where two become one across a dimensional boundary, which side retains the original? And what exactly returns to fill the vacancy left behind?" As this account concludes, I invite you to consider the words reportedly found carved into the stones of the Morgan well, documented in Hayes's photographs, but never satisfactorily translated. What is reflected may also observe. The watchers and the watched. 2 points, perfectly aligned. Some boundaries, it seems, are maintained not to keep something out, but to keep something in. In the decades since the events described, numerous researchers, paranormal investigators, and curious visitors have attempted to unravel the mystery of the Morgan Well. None have produced definitive explanations, and many have reported experiences similar to those documented throughout this account: temporal anomalies, acoustic peculiarities, the unsettling sensation of being observed by oneself. The property today remains undeveloped, a rectangle of wilderness amid cultivated fields. Satellite imagery shows a perfect circle of altered vegetation, centered on the presumed location of the sealed well, a circle precisely matching the dimensions recorded in Finch's original survey. Environmental scientists who have analyzed soil samples from the perimeter report unusual electromagnetic properties, but no chemical contamination or radiation that would explain the vegetation pattern. In 1977, Dr. James Harrison of MIT conducted remote sensing studies of the site using equipment designed to detect minute gravitational anomalies. His findings, published in a specialized scientific journal but largely ignored by mainstream academia, described what he termed a localized gravitational inversion, a phenomenon where objects within the circle experienced slightly less gravitational pull than calculated models predicted. While the difference was minimal, Harrison argued it was consistent and measurable, suggesting a distortion of space-time that cannot be explained by conventional geological formations. Harrison's measurements also detected what he described as temporal fluctuations within the circle, variations in how time itself appeared to flow. Atomic clocks placed at various points within the affected area show consistent but unpredictable variations, he wrote. Most curious is the pattern of these fluctuations, which occur simultaneously at opposite points within the circle, as if the area contains pairs of locations that remain somehow connected despite their physical separation. Following Harrison's study, the property was designated a site of scientific interest, though access remained restricted to approved researchers. Between 1978 and 1981, a series of automated monitoring stations were installed around the perimeter, recording environmental data, acoustic patterns, and electromagnetic fluctuations. The results, compiled in a classified report, later partially declassified in 1995, documented several unexplained phenomena. Most notably, on December 17th of each year, the anniversary of the twins' disappearance, instruments recorded significant spikes in electromagnetic activity centered on the sealed well. Audio sensors captured what technicians described as overlapping voices speaking in unison, though the quality was too poor for voice analysis. Perhaps most disturbing were the photographs taken by automated cameras during these events, images that showed consistent light anomalies that, when analyzed, appeared to form the silhouettes of two human figures standing back to back. Former research assistant David Morris, who helped maintain the monitoring equipment during this period, described his experiences in a 1997 interview. The equipment malfunctioned constantly, but in consistent ways. Batteries would drain simultaneously in devices on opposite sides of the property. Digital recordings would contain identical errors at precisely the same timestamp. It was as if the site itself was creating symmetrical disruptions. Everything happened in matched pairs, separated in space, but connected in some way we couldn't explain. Morris also reported personal experiences that echoed earlier accounts. I never saw the figures that others described, but I often felt watched from multiple angles simultaneously. Sometimes I'd be working alone and distinctly hear footsteps approaching from behind, the same footsteps from two different directions at once. When I turned, no one was there, but the sensation of being observed remained. In 1982, funding for the monitoring program was discontinued and the equipment removed. Official records cite budget constraints and lack of significant findings, but internal memos suggest another factor: the psychological impact on research personnel. According to a confidential report later obtained through Freedom of Information requests, 5 of the 11 researchers assigned to the project reported unusual psychological symptoms, including persistent déjà vu, dreams of self-duplication, and what one psychologist termed perspective dissonance, the sensation of observing oneself from outside one's body. During the following decades, the Morgan property faded once again from official attention, though local interest never entirely disappeared. Occasional trespassers reported strange experiences, and the legend became firmly embedded in regional folklore. Then, in 2007, an unexpected discovery reignited scientific interest in the case. During renovation of an old building in Paris, Kentucky, the former offices of the Bourbon County Register, workers discovered a sealed metal box hidden within a wall cavity. Inside was a collection of daguerreotype photographs dated 1868, bearing the name of a local photographer, Samuel Wilson. Among these was a formal portrait labeled simply Morgan Brothers, October 1868, one of the few verified images of the twins taken before their disappearance. What made this photograph remarkable was not merely its historical significance, but its unusual properties. Art conservator Eleanor Hayes, who examined the image for the Bourbon County Historical Society, noted several anomalies. The daguerreotype shows the Morgan twins standing side by side, dressed identically. Initial examination suggests a conventional portrait, but closer inspection reveals troubling inconsistencies. Although the subjects are presented as two separate individuals, their positions, expressions, and even the minute details of their clothing are identical to a degree that would be impossible to arrange deliberately. It's as if a single figure was captured twice in the exact same moment. More disturbing was Hayes's discovery when the photograph was examined under ultraviolet light. The chemical composition of the image is inconsistent with standard daguerreotype processes of the period. Spectroscopic analysis indicates the presence of compounds that weren't synthesized until the early 20th century. Either this is an elaborate hoax created decades after the Morgan disappearance, or the photographic process captured something that altered the chemical properties of the plate itself. The discovery prompted physicist Dr. Samuel Chen to propose a new investigation of the Morgan property using advanced quantum field detection equipment. Chen's research team, granted limited access to the site in 2009, established a temporary laboratory at the perimeter of the circle, identified in previous studies. Their findings, published in a controversial paper titled Quantum Entanglement Anomalies in Spatially Fixed Locations, suggested something unprecedented. Our measurements indicate that subatomic particles within the affected area exhibit entanglement properties that defy conventional quantum theory, Chen wrote. Specifically, particles at opposite points within the circle demonstrate perfect correlation regardless of distance, a phenomenon similar to quantum entanglement but occurring spontaneously and remaining stable over time. More significantly, these entangled pairs appear to be oriented around a central axis, corresponding to the location of the sealed well. Chen's team also documented what they termed observer-dependent reality fluctuations, subtle variations in measurement results depending on who was taking the readings. Two observers measuring the same phenomenon simultaneously with identical equipment consistently recorded slightly different results, the paper noted. These differences were not random, but exhibited a pattern suggesting that the act of observation itself was influencing the phenomenon being observed, consistent with quantum principles, but at a macroscopic scale that current theory cannot explain. The implications of Chen's research were profound, but highly controversial. In essence, he proposed that the Morgan property existed in what he termed a quantum superposition state, a condition where multiple realities overlapped in a single location. This theory, while intriguing, was dismissed by many mainstream physicists as speculative and unsubstantiated. Funding for further research was denied, and Chen's academic reputation suffered from his association with what many regarded as pseudoscience. However, Chen's work attracted attention from unexpected quarters. In 2011, neuropsychologist Dr. Amelia Richardson proposed a study examining the psychological effects of prolonged exposure to the Morgan property. Her hypothesis centered on the concept that the reported phenomena might represent not physical anomalies, but perceptual ones, alterations in how human consciousness processed reality when exposed to certain environmental conditions. Richardson's team conducted controlled experiments with volunteers who spent varying lengths of time within the boundaries of the property. Their results, while preliminary, suggested unusual patterns in brain activity among subjects exposed to the site. EEG readings showed what Richardson described as hemispheric synchronization anomalies, patterns where the right and left hemispheres of the brain displayed identical activity despite typically functioning semi-independently. Most intriguing were the consistent reports from test subjects describing alterations in self-perception. Approximately 63% of participants reported experiencing what we've termed perspective multiplication, Richardson wrote. They described simultaneously perceiving themselves from multiple viewpoints, not merely imagining this experience, but genuinely perceiving it as reality. These episodes were brief but consistent, typically occurring when subjects were positioned at specific points within the property boundaries. Richardson's research was discontinued after several participants experienced severe psychological distress following their exposure to the site. One individual, identified only as Subject 17 in the study documentation, developed persistent symptoms described as reality disassociation, an inability to maintain a singular perspective on the world. The subject reports continuously experiencing two simultaneous but slightly different versions of reality, Richardson noted in her final report. This condition has not responded to conventional treatment and appears to be progressively worsening. In 2015, the Morgan property was designated a restricted area by federal authorities, ostensibly for environmental reasons. A permanent fence was erected around the perimeter and regular security patrols established to prevent unauthorized access. Official statements cited concerns about ground stability and potential contaminants from 19th century agricultural practices, but internal documents obtained by investigative journalist Mark Stevens suggested other motivations. The site demonstrates properties consistent with a naturally occurring quantum anomaly, one classified memo stated. Continued civilian exposure presents unacceptable risks of psychological impact and potential reality destabilization. Containment and ongoing monitoring are recommended until the phenomenon is better understood. Since then, official information about the Morgan property has been limited and carefully controlled. Satellite imagery shows a perfect circle of discolored vegetation centered on the presumed location of the well, a pattern that remains constant despite seasonal changes. Occasionally, unusual atmospheric phenomena are reported in the vicinity, lights that appear to occupy the same space when viewed from different angles, sounds that seem to originate from multiple locations simultaneously. Local residents continue to report sightings of two identical figures at the property boundaries, particularly around the anniversary of the twins' disappearance. These accounts remain remarkably consistent with those recorded a century earlier. Two men of identical appearance, dressed in 19th century clothing, observing but never approaching. Those who claim to have seen the figures describe an unsettling quality to their movements, a perfect synchronization that seems deliberate yet effortless, as if they are not two individuals moving in unison, but a single entity occupying two forms. The most recent documented encounter occurred in December 2016, when hunter Michael Simmons accidentally crossed the property boundary while tracking a wounded deer. In his statement to local authorities, Simmons described encountering two men standing in a small clearing near the center of the property. They were facing away from me, standing back to back, Simmons reported. When I called out, they turned, not toward me, but toward each other. That's when I realized they were identical, down to the smallest detail. As they turned, they spoke in perfect unison. "We have been expecting you, though not precisely you." I can't explain the fear that came over me then. It wasn't anything they did. It was the wrongness of how they existed. I ran and didn't look back. Simmons's account might be dismissed as the product of imagination or local folklore influence, except for one detail that aligns with scientific observations. The precise location where he reported seeing the figures corresponds exactly with the center of the circular anomaly identified in multiple studies, the presumed location of the sealed well. Perhaps the most profound insight comes from physicist Dr. Chen, who, despite the damage to his professional reputation, continued to study the Morgan case until his death in 2019. In his final unpublished manuscript, he wrote, "What the Morgan twins may have discovered was not a door to another place, but a window into another perspective, a way of experiencing reality from multiple positions simultaneously. If their consciousness indeed became entangled across a dimensional boundary, then they exist now in a state we can barely comprehend, neither here nor there, neither past nor present, but in a superposition of states that allows them to observe us while we observe them, across a gulf that is not physical, but perceptual." As this account concludes, consider this final thought. The most disturbing aspect of the Morgan mystery may not be what happened to the twins, but what their disappearance suggests about the nature of reality itself. The true horror of their experiment lies not in where they went, but in what they became. Beings no longer constrained to a single point of observation, experiencing existence from multiple perspectives at once. If their theories were correct, then the boundaries we perceive between self and other, between here and there, between now and then, may be more permeable than we dare acknowledge. The well they constructed might still serve its purpose, not as a passage to another place, but as a window through which something watches, something that was once human but now exists in a state of perpetual duality, simultaneously present and absent, observer and observed. The Morgan property remains off-limits to the public, the concrete seal over the well undisturbed for decades. Yet locals insist that during particularly still nights, especially in winter, sounds can be heard emanating from the sealed site, sounds described invariably as voices speaking in perfect unison, saying identical words with the precision of a single voice echoed across an impossible distance. And occasionally, though few will admit it publicly, residents near the old Morgan property report glimpsing their own reflections in windows and mirrors moving independently of themselves, just for a moment, just at the corner of their vision. A subtle difference in expression, a slight delay in movement, as if something else is looking back, something that wears their face but sees with different eyes, something that observes from another angle, across a boundary that was never meant to be crossed. Perhaps some mysteries persist not because they cannot be solved, but because their solutions lie beyond what we are prepared to accept. The disappearance of the Morgan twins may be less about where they went and more about what they became, a question for which our conventional understanding of reality provides no satisfactory answer.